So I'm going to turn it over to you, Lisa. Lisa was born in New York City. She spent a good part of her life, I know, in New Jersey, a lot of it birding. She could tell you more about her bio, but I know she was, she joined Monmouth County Audubon Society in probably around 2000.
I think it was like 9 or 8. Yeah, it's a while. I was young. I was 5 when I joined.
She was 5. We came in through our children's program, as did I. And she's been an active birder and active in other areas of conservation, and has now delved seriously into astronomy. So we're happy to have Lisa here tonight to talk to us about the interaction of astronomy and migration. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and turn my video off. And Lisa, you can, one thing I don't always remember to do, but if you would please tell the audience whether you would like questions during or your program, or if you'd like to take questions at the end. We have time.
Take them at the end. I think that's probably the easiest. Take them at the end. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
I'm putting myself on mute.
Very good. So as Colette mentioned, in the past few years, I have caught the astronomy bug very seriously. So there's a picture of myself, and many of you know my husband, Rob, my partner in crime. So Colette mentioned that I became interested in conservation since my childhood in Brooklyn, New York, and I've always had a fascination with the moon. I think it was sort of something I inherited from my father. My father was a fisherman and always talked about the effect of the moon on fishing and how the fish won't bite when there's a full moon. So I think from that point is when I became very intrigued with this concept of connecting different concepts with the moon, especially, and wildlife. I loved science and math from early on, but I took another path to Wall Street. I did live in Boston for 4 years for my career, my Wall Street project management job, but I did humpback whale surveys for the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. I moved to New Jersey in 2005. 5 years later is when I met my husband, Rob, while we were both chasing a Henslow sparrow in Cape May. So that's the story of how we met. I have been doing volunteer monitoring for beach nesting birds on and off for about over 11 years. I've been an associate naturalist for New Jersey Audubon, field trip coordinator for Monmouth County, New Jersey Audubon, along with Rob. And I do pass those reins now as field trip coordinator to Paul Mandela. So Paul, welcome. I have written about conservation, birds and insects for various publications and organizations. I am the compiler for the Ramsey, New Jersey Christmas bird count for the past few years, which is sponsored by New Jersey Audubon Society. So how all this came to be with the astronomy bug? Well, in 2019, I had my path on my Lyme disease journey started, and I was on some heavy dosage of doxycycline, which prevented me from going out in the daytime because there's a sun sensitivity that comes about when you're on doxycycline. So I kind of caught the blues there, and Rob suggested that we take our spotting scope, our Swarovski birding scope, outside, take a look at Jupiter and Saturn. And many astronomers will tell you that they got the hook when they saw Saturn's rings and Jupiter's moons for the first time. And I'm right along with that story as well. So that was about 2019. I bought a book called 50 Things to See on the Moon. I also bought another book called 50 Things to See with a Telescope by John Reed. He became my mentor when I reached out to him during the pandemic and said, you know, I have these books, I've been doing the basics, and I just want more. So he led me to a program called Explore the Universe, which is sponsored by the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. And that's a certificate program. And I joined the society. I now have an affiliation with the Halifax Center and a much bigger telescope that fills my nights these days. So, or these nights, I should say. So that's how I came to be in astronomy. So back in college, I took a class called Making Connections, and it was about taking two unlikely concepts and connecting them. And I started thinking about this concept of astronomy and migration specifically when I was doing my Explore the Moon certificate and had my scope. It was actually the Swarovski birding scope, so you can do this with a small scope. And I had it pointed at the face of the moon, and I noticed birds that were flying in front of the face of the moon. Now, I love this quote because it was once thought back in the 17th century that birds migrated to and from the moon because they actually saw this behavior and thought that the birds were migrating to the moon, but we know that to be different now, of course. But if you go out on a heavy migration night, and many of you know about the dependency on winds. So right now we're in the fall migration, or the southbound migration. You want winds with a northerly component, and if you do that around the time of the full moon, so give or take, when it's a nice bright face, and point your scope at the face of the moon, you can actually see migrating birds passing over. A lot of people also don't realize if you step out on these heavy migration nights, you can also hear chip notes overhead as the birds are migrating. So the photo on the left, I just snapped that with my cell phone through the scope. That is a migrating bird passing over Copernicus crater. That was a 99% full harvest moon that occurred in 2020. And then on the right, there is a software that astronomers use to stack images, so you can get a nice crisp image. Usually, if you're doing deep sky objects or something. I decided to play with it and see if I could extract. This was from a 2-second video to show the progression of two birds flying in front of the moon back in 2020. So this was 2 seconds worth of video, and you can see the progression of those two birds moving. Now, I thought this was an original concept. Turns out it was not. The idea of moon watching for migration was first described by George Lowry and Robert Newman in that 20-year period between the 40s and the 1960s. And what they described was that pointing a telescope at the illuminated disk of the moon actually facilitates the ability to see birds migrating at night. So this is nothing new. I guess I'm not that original after all. So I'm going to show a video here. This was video that I took, I believe it was in the spring, so don't blink. This is what you'll see. I'll play that again. This is what you'll see if you focus your scope, your telescope, your birding scope at the face of the moon. So, you could take the video. If you're taking video, you could slow it down. I have yet to identify some of the species. Rob and I sometimes see, pointy wings, so we think maybe they're swallows or something that are migrating in front of the moon. But I'll leave that to the experts to identify those birds. So I started to dig deeper into this concept and found that there are actually studies that were done about the correlation between migration and the moon specifically. Lund University in Sweden has a team of scientists that published a paper in October of 2019. And they studied the European nightjar, which is cousin to our whippoorwill, of course. And they found that birds' nocturnal hunting activity for flying insects more than doubled on moonlit nights. So that makes sense. That's an expected outcome. Of course, you see moths attracted to light. Think of that concept. So the birds will follow the food. But what's more important that came out of that study is the fact that these birds, this specific species of European nightjar, departed for southbound migration, and it consistently took place 10 to 11 days after the full moon for this particular species. They all synchronized their flight and took off at the same time. And this was the first study of its kind to determine that the lunar cycle does drive migration of a nocturnal bird. So many people are probably familiar with NextRad or Birdcast. So Birdcast is a consortium of organizations led by Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they produce these Birdcast maps. I think a lot of us have seen this, and it shows heavy migration nights, and it shows, you know, the prediction of or not even the prediction, it's the real-time map showing concentrations of birds and bats and insects as they migrate. Now you can pull up historical data, and I've done that. So I decided to map the full moon of September 21st, 2021, which is when I started this work, versus the new moon of October 6th of 2021. And you can see on the left that the night of the full moon, the central flyway was lit up. So I took data for exactly the same time. The night of the full moon, again, pictured on the left, there were 732 million birds that were in flight at that time. That's 11:55 p.m. Eastern, versus the new moon, where there was only 185 million birds in flight. I mean, still a significant number, but definitely not the same volume that you see on the full moon. Taking that concept even further, I extracted the data and decided to map it out. And there are 2 new moon cycles, 1 full moon cycle, and you can see the peaks around the full moon. There's that September 20th full moon, and you can see around the new moon that there are some dips. Now I'll point you to the right side of this chart, and you'll see that the October new moon, October 6th in this case for 2021, there was that dip. There's that 185 million birds that we talked about. But just prior, while there was still some illumination on the face of the moon, you see 790 million birds passing. Now, if you think back to last fall, there was sort of a poor migration. The winds were not favorable, so those birds got backed up. So in addition to the moon cycle that you do need some illumination, the winds do also have to be favorable, because that comes into play with the expenditure of energy that the birds will have to use in migration. So there are new findings all the time on this topic. This was an interesting article that came out regarding black swifts. Black swifts are the swift species that's out west. This was related to a lunar eclipse. So normally black swifts will stay aloft for up to 8 months, and they ascend to up to 3 miles in the sky. There was a lunar eclipse in January 20 of 2019. And we all know what happens during eclipse. So that effectively turns off the moonlight for some period of time during a full moon. And they tracked this team tracked the black swifts, and they saw that they were rapidly descending from their typical altitude of 13,000 feet. And by the time that the eclipse ended, the swifts returned to those higher altitudes. So there is more proof that the illumination comes into play for some species. So I think this is another great case study. So that little cutie on the left, saw-whet owls. We all know they're a little bit of a grail bird for us to see here in New Jersey, because they are so secretive. And so the studies that we have really rely very heavily on banding data. And so the birds that will wander typically during the winter are female birds, and the male birds will remain in Canada and points north to defend their territories. So when the banders catch birds, typically it's female birds. Possibly you might get some young males in there as well. There are eruption years of every 4 years where higher numbers will wander, and these birds do migrate at night. And, we have some banding studies here that suggest that the higher moon illumination have a strong inverse relationship with capture rates. And there are a few theories around that. The first one is that increased moonlight will cause greater mist net visibility. So I think that's pretty common sense. So the birds can actually see the mist net and avoid it. For those who don't know, the mist net is a very fine net that a bander will use to catch the birds and then extract them from the net and band them and release them. The other theory is that owl migration is lower because they don't want to be predated by larger owls such as barred or great horned that will effectively eat them. And then finally, we talked about how birds are very logical in how they expend their energy. Rodents are not as active under brighter conditions because they're avoiding being predated. So the birds, the saw-whets in this case, are not going to go after them. They're not going to, waste their energy that they don't have and get zero return. Now, this study about rodents not being as active under brighter conditions was another study that was done with barn owls, where scientists were actually extracting the contents of barn owl pellets and found that around the full moon, they were not finding any rodent remains. So that's how that was proven. So many of you are probably aware of our local saw-whet owl banding projects. There are a few throughout the state. I know there's one in Mercer County that some people participate in, and shout out to Professor Tom Brown, who is our home team owl bander. He also does songbirds. So if you've been to Sandy Hook during migration and see the friendly bander, that's Tom Brown. Now he is a U.S. federally licensed bird bander. He does songbirds and raptors. He bands on Sandy Hook, and he's been doing this for over a decade. And he has an extensive database of data that he has been collecting about saw-whet owl migration and populations. I mentioned that he is a part of, a group of banders in New Jersey. Well, they're actually across the United States and Canada who extract this data and put it into a database. And we're able to use that data to understand population shifts and trends. Professor Brown was kind enough to loan me his data. So I did ask him, explained to him the project I was doing, and he sent me 10 years worth of data, which just happened to be 99 banding sessions. So that was from 2010 to 2020. And I took each of those nights that he banded and I mapped it versus the phase of the moon. And what did I find? So I was able to prove my point, again, to the earlier point, that lower lunar illumination results in higher captures of saw-whets. So we see that 0 to 20%, which is represented there in the black pie piece, if you will, and that was 0 to 20% lunar illumination. So you're looking at just prior to first quarter. And then another 13% for the next phase, the 21 to 40. So with first quarter being in the 40 to 50% range. So that's when you have the most captures for saw-whets. So a definite correlation there. Now I'm going to shift us a little bit to the stars. I'm going to take us away from the moon for a bit. There was a 1967 study that talked about the role that stars play in southbound or autumn migration. And there were birds that were placed in these special cages that had a starlit dome that simulated the rotation of the night sky. Now, when birds migrate, they hop in the direction in which they wish to migrate. So the birds hop south in the simulator as they would. And then the researchers would do different things like remove certain star patterns around within 35 degrees of the North Star. And what the study found is that the birds became disoriented when the researchers removed some of those stars and constellations within 35 degrees of the North Star. So that research actually concluded that it's not the individual stars themselves that the indigo buntings are orienting themselves to, but rather the patterns around the center point, which in this case is the North Star. This was published in National Geographic in November of 2019, but the study itself dates back to 1967. So right now, in case you're not aware, we are in the beginnings of the next solar cycle. What that means is that we have a lot of solar activity. So we have a lot of sunspots. There's a lot of what they call CMEs, coronal mass ejections, a lot of prominences. The sun is very active these days. If you follow any travel sites or anything, and you'll notice that there are a lot of photographs of aurora borealis. That is a direct link to the solar activity. So I decided to dive in and see, how does solar activity affect the birds? So obviously, when you have solar activity, you might be aware that GPS, for example, becomes disrupted, or radio waves become disrupted. A lot of satellites may become disrupted if the solar activity is strong enough. So this can also impact migratory birds as well. There's a 2019 study that looked at some specific species of birds, such as European robins, and it found that it does indeed interrupt their geomagnetic sense as well. So birds, and then some other animals as well that we'll talk about in a bit. So why does light pollution matter? We talked about, for example, the case study with the indigo buntings, where they're looking at patterns of stars. Well, light and noise pollution in birds, it does matter. So light pollution, will, if you've ever stepped out into a dark sky site, so let's say you're out west and in Wyoming, and you look up, you can see the Milky Way with so much clarity, versus if I step out in my yard here in Marlborough Township, I can't see the Milky Way. I might see some of the stars and constellations, the brighter ones, because of light pollution. So this does obviously come into play in nature as well. So the National Science Foundation, they cited an article in Nature about how noise and light pollution will affect breeding birds in North America. And they looked at data spanning the reproductive success of 58,000 nests from 142 species across North America. And their findings were that light pollution caused the birds to begin nesting up to a month earlier than normal in open environments such as grasslands and wetlands. And it's 18 days earlier in forested environments. So why is that significant? Well, the implications there is a mismatch in timing. So you may not have the hatch of insects that you need to support those young birds, for example. So, it's not sustainable for breeding. The same study also found that noise pollution will impact birds in a forest environment and delay nesting for birds as well. Especially for songs who are at a lower frequency, and they could not hear them over human noise. So the next steps in this study is that the study is leading to the development of a sensitivity index for all North American birds. And that's very significant because in the astronomy world, we're very concerned with dark skies and light skies, and implications of light pollution on being able to see the sky clearly. So a lot of astronomy organizations are partnering with a lot of conservation organizations, because it really is impacting a lot of the life here on Earth. So we talk about migration now. So millions of birds migrate between the wintering grounds and breeding grounds. We know that they're going up to a lot of birds are going up to Canada, going down to South America, back and forth. So one very long distant migrant, the blackpoll warbler, that weighs less than half an ounce in weight, and it travels between these 2 points, and they span a 1,500-mile migration each way. So that's pretty remarkable when you think about this little bird. Now, unfortunately, and I do apologize for this photo, but I do think it certainly makes you think about how we as humans impact this story. This was a common yellowthroat that I found outside my former office building in Jersey City on a particular morning that followed a very, very heavy night of migration. There were any number of birds that were stunned and deceased. White-throat sparrows do seem to be numerous on those nights in front of the building. But this female common yellowthroat, unfortunately, did not make it. Now, most species do migrate at night when predators are less active. So these collisions with buildings occur because they're attracted to the windows of the office buildings that have lights left on all night. They hit the tall buildings, and most strikes, unfortunately, are fatal. They say that an estimated 600 million birds die from building collisions each year in the US, and the source of that data is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So there is a lot of work that's being done around that. And I do like to talk about the work that Audubon is doing. This is a very special situation. Of course, we just passed the anniversary of September 11th, and that's a day that impacted me with loss as well. And, you know, many of us do appreciate the memorial that occurs every year with the lights, you know, that emulate the towers. So, but there is impact, and there's an estimated 160,000 birds are impacted by the tribute lights each year. And so there are conservation volunteers that lie on mats and count migrating birds, because this is the beginning of peak migration for birds and bats. If anybody's friends with Doug Gotchfeld on Facebook, he just happened to post, I think it was today, photographs of he's one of these volunteers, and he took video of, no, it was raining, if you remember, it was raining this September 11th. He took video of common nighthawks that were chasing after moths that were attracted to the light. So that was really good footage to demonstrate this point about how the lights do impact and attract, and in some cases, you know, birds. Now we have to understand what the implication is. The goal is not to stop the lights or the tribute itself, but to understand what those implications are and understand how we can mitigate risk. So going back to the situation with the buildings, the solution, there are many different organizations in big cities that are working to mitigate this. Here's Lights Out Baltimore. I think they have one of the best social media campaigns that I've come across throughout the years. Every 9 seconds, a bird dies from colliding with a building. This is a nonprofit project of the Baltimore Bird Club, and they save birds from collisions. So they advocate for reducing light pollution during the migration months of April, May, September, and October by influencing these real estate companies to turn off non-essential lighting between the hours of 11 and 6. And they have a very, very strong campaign in Baltimore to do this. And, you know, you could see that there are projects all throughout the United States. The New Jersey Audubon, of course, another great organization that I love, that's near and dear to my heart. They are involved, I think, in Newark and, you know, some of our more heavily populated areas with large buildings. Project Safe Flight is New York City Audubon's project. Dallas has also joined in, and all throughout Chicago, Houston, all throughout the United States, the big cities have gotten involved. So, you know, you can be a part of the solution as well through advocacy, leadership, influence, education, and partnership. You know, I hope you think of the little indigo buntings that are orienting themselves to the patterns of stars, and, you know, are they becoming disoriented, or the birds that are flying high at night just to try to get back home to their wintering grounds. You know, if you have, your voice matters, definitely. You know, when I saw the collisions that were taking place outside of my building in Jersey City, I spoke to people in the building. and tried to educate them. I mean, it starts with us. It starts with each and every one of us. So I like to put this in the and make the connection in this presentation so that we can understand what the implications are. So let's get back to migration, shall we? The connection between migration and astronomy, it's not just for the birds. Here is a really fun example that a friend of mine told me about when I was putting this presentation together. She asked me if I knew about the dung beetles. And so, you know, dung beetles kind of piques my curiosity. But there was a study done, again, Lund University in Sweden. Those are our friends from the Nightjar study. They did a study about African dung beetles, and the study found that they orient themselves to move along straight paths. So not the individual stars themselves, but to the Milky Way. And this was the first documented use of the Milky Way for orientation in the animal kingdom. So things that we take for granted, like the Milky Way, is impacting this little dung beetle and how they move. So it is all connected. We have to stop and think about, you know, how the two least likely things in the world could possibly be connected, and just to understand the animal kingdom. So researchers, what they did was they constructed an artificial Milky Way using LEDs, and they found that the variance in brightness between the different sections of the Milky Way was key in the navigation of the dung beetles. So kind of a fun example. I really like this one. If anybody who knows me knows that I love Shark Week and the shark programs that National Geographic and Discovery do. This was a program done by National Geographic this summer. It's called Shark Side of the Moon. The title alone hooked me. This was a story of Dr. Palaos Salinas de Leon. He belongs to the Charles Darwin Foundation in the Galapagos, and he studies and tracks female scalloped hammerheads, which are critically endangered sharks. And he studies their migration from the Galapagos to the coast of Panama. And he tagged 10 pregnant scalloped hammerhead sharks. And at the top left there, that's Cassiopeia. Had to throw that in there because there's an astronomy connection. Her name is Cassiopeia. So he tagged these 10 sharks that left for their journeys to the nursery grounds. He found that 8 of them actually left on the full moon. And this is the first evidence of shark migration sharing a connection with the moon. So really neat stuff. They're just getting started in that work. This was just only recently discovered. I think the tagging took place back in February of last year. So they're getting started with this work. So going back to sunspots, there is a connection between sunspots and the stranding of whales. This was an article in the New York Times that appeared in February of 2020. And this was a study that came out of Duke University, and they looked at gray whale beach strandings and published their findings in Current Biology of February 2020, and found that gray whales will strand more often on days with increased levels of atmospheric and radio frequency noise. Now, remember, this is what sunspots do. When you have more solar activity, it interrupts radio frequencies, right? We think back to the old days before we had cable. Sometimes we would lose channels when there were heavy sunspots, and they would warn us that this could potentially happen because I think it takes approximately like 36 to 72 hours for it to reach from the sun to Earth. So there's a little bit of warning. We know that that's going to happen. But the same way that it interrupted our television channels back in the day, it also interrupts the brains of the gray whales. So they studied these gray whales. The species gray whale specifically was chosen because they have one of the longest mammal migrations of up to 10,000 miles. There is an extensive history of their strandings in a database. And they are a near shore migrator, so that increases the risk of stranding. So that's why this particular species of whale was selected. And what this study found was that they were more than 4 times likely to strand when there was a lot of radio frequency noise from a solar outburst. So this does overwhelm the whale's senses. I love this quote because I think it really sums it up. It's as if it's turning off the GPS in the middle of their trip. So the whales become disoriented and become stranded. This team from Duke University now plans to study other whale species on other continents as well. So that should be some very interesting work. And here's a list of other animals that we find use magnetic fields for navigation. So you can see everything from little honeybees all the way up to sharks and tuna and salmon and dolphins and sea turtles. So something to keep in mind. I mean, I'm definitely keeping an eye to this because we're very early in this new solar cycle. I think we're only about 2 or 3 years in. And the cycle itself lasts 11 years. And so far, it's been a very powerful cycle. So something interesting, I've actually reached out to researchers at the University of Florida who do a lot of shark work and tried to get some of their data. And I want to see if I can correlate it with the solar activity and see if I can come up with a correlation and see if there's any relationship specifically with great whites. So I want to say thank you. This is a little little cartoon that you never know how animals are impacted by the moon, for example. This particular wolf is singing Wonderwall. So, you know, who knows what's yet to be discovered. But thank you so much for your time. This is such a fun topic. And if anybody has any correlations that they know about, send them my way. I'm always interested in expanding this project. And this is really a labor of love for me. I've really come to enjoy this project. So thank you. I will take any questions if there are any.
This is Colette. I just want to say, if you have a question, please put it into the chat. Put it into the chat. You can get the chat up on your screen and put your question into the chat, because I don't, we're in a webinar format, so we're not going to be able to hear you if you speak.
I either answered everybody's questions or I put them to sleep.
I doubt that. I doubt that. I think it's probably maybe a difficulty with the chat.
It says Jim Wright has raised his hand. Hi, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah, so type those questions right into the chat and we'll field them. I guess there's no way to change the format mid. There we go.
I just hit allow to talk on Jim. Let's see if we can talk.
I see Jim.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Jim, you look great.
That's my biggest fear. So look, chat is disabled on my screen.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
I just wanted to say it was a great presentation, Patty, and I loved it.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for being great supporters. I appreciate it.
Okay, I gotta shut me off now.
Fly away, Jim. Fly away.
Migrate.
I don't know how to shut you off. You disappeared from my list. Oh, here you are. Okay. Okay, I'll mute you. Okay, so I guess if anyone, Paul's got his hand raised, allowed to talk. Okay. Okay, Paul, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to tell you that the chat is disabled as well. So I think it might be for everybody. So I guess the best way for people to ask a question is to hit the raise your hand button, and then you can get your voice added to ask your questions.
Thank you, Paul. I don't know how I did that. I must have messed up when I set the webinar up, because usually we have chat.
So go ahead and raise your hand if you have any questions. I'm happy to field them. Or we are going to post the copy of the recording up in the Facebook group. I'll probably put that on the website as well. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask me there as well. if you're too shy now. Let's see, I see Jim, I see Paul, Edward Johnson. Do you have your hand? You have your hand raised. Let's see, can I? Here we go.
We're unmuted. Okay,
Hello,
there we
we're
go.
unmuted. This is Paul Johnson, his son. Yeah, we found out actually that there was also a civilization actually that actually used both sorry, our cat's there. That used both the stars, the moon, and the waves, and also the even the birds too to navigate their ways around their surroundings. Which was actually, it's less of a question, more of a statement. Sorry to ask it. But it was actually the people. It was the Lapita people, also known as the Polynesians of the South Pacific. Actually, and they were,
There's definitely a correlation between many civilizations that are using stars and nature around them, behaviors of animals around them as well. The Mi'kmaq tribe up in they're up in Atlantic Canada. They definitely, they've named the moons after what a lot of the animals were doing. For example, this particular full moon, the one that we call the harvest moon, is the moose mate calling moon. So a lot of early civilizations and tribes that are in tune to nature do indeed rely on the stars and patterns of stars, for example. Once you start to become in tune, like I know that fall and winter are coming because I'm starting to see Orion earlier and earlier in the sky. So there's so much to learn from the sky. Yeah, thank you for that.
thank you. We also sometimes see our owls in our backyard actually sometimes using the moon also during this time of year to actually coordinate when to I think strike exactly when to hunt, because as I said, it's during like migration season when all the warblers show up, and they just usually and they just try to and they looks almost like sometimes when I see it, it looks like they're slowly timing it, literally second by second.
Yeah, that's neat stuff. It's great to be in tune to that. Thank you for those observations.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Lisa, I thought of one other moon coordination between animals. It's corals. Corals will release on full moons there. Do like a mass release and let their spawn go, and it's really heavy spawning nights on full moons, and all kinds of creatures also come out to feed because there's so much food in the water. So
yeah, I'm well aware of, I think it's the Great Barrier Reef, right? Where there's a big spawning event that happens when the waters reach a certain temperature, and it's the night before the full moon. And that, no, excellent point, that prompts the spawning of the coral and other animals as well, to your point, to come out and feed on that spawn.
yeah, when I lived on a small island in the Marshall Islands called Namdrik, my host dad would go out on a certain day before or right around the full moon to go spearfishing, because he said it was the best fishing of the year.
Yeah, there's actually a few schools of thought on that one. Because I think I mentioned that I grew up the daughter of a fisherman, and he would say, stay away from the full moon. But when you dig deeper into that, it's actually species specific, believe it or not. So while my father was doing deep sea fishing for things like flounder or bluefish, the full moon impacted them because they may not have a tolerance for the stronger tides. But certain sharks, for example, they love to feed on full moons. So it's really neat. It's really neat how each species is so different on how they're impacted, but there are direct correlations for sure. Yeah, thanks, Paul.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Migrating owls, and since we're running into peak migratory for other raptors, what have you found out about that kind of correlation between the moon and raptors?
Yeah, raptors specifically, I haven't delved into, but it's definitely on my list because I love hawk watching. So it sounds like you just issued me a challenge, right?
Thanks a lot.
So I accept it. I will find out and I will report my findings back to you. All right, I see Linda Mack. I'll allow you to talk.
Hi. Hi.
Hello, stranger.
Yeah, I thought your program was wonderful.
Thank you.
You did a great job, a lot of material. And here's a thought. I know this would be very hard to do, but have you considered a field trip? You'd probably have to build in more than one date because of weather, but I think that would be a lot of fun.
To do a field trip specifically around the full moons, for example.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you mean a field trip at night, Linda?
Yep.
To see the migration by the moon?
Yep.
Not a bad idea.
And, for those who still have good hearing, we could all be listening and all that, but I know it would be difficult just trying to strike a date or two, but something to think about.
Might have to coordinate that with the new field trip coordinator.
Okay, there you go. I think you have an in.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm always out there with the scope. So my neighbors at this point are used to
Yeah.
Rob with the binoculars in the day and me with the telescope at night. I'm convinced that the newer neighbors think we're narcs, but
It's that strange couple again.
and that's only the first reason.
Thanks.
Good to hear from you, Linda.
You too. Yeah, good to see you.
Thanks. All right, is that it? Any other questions? I've got homework from Jim, so I'm going to take that away.
Yeah, I guess you didn't anticipate getting homework from our participant, but thanks, Jim, for all your input.
Now, I actually do have a list of things that I'm tracking and trying to source this information. I mentioned reaching out to the University of Florida. I think in academic circles, I'm going to start to become known as that nuisance lady who's always asking for data.
Asking for data about the moon, yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much, Lisa. This was very interesting and informative, and there's a lot more to migration than one might think, and certainly the interaction. Thanks for the comments from the participants too, particularly the comments about the cultures, ancient civilizations. I'm sure ancient civilizations particularly relied a lot more on the stars than we do. Sorry, I just muted myself. All right. For some reason, my screen is saying I'm in safe driving mode.
No, I'm hearing you right now. There was a little cutout before.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Oh, we lost you again, Colette. It says you're on mute. No,
Okay.
I think, we go.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So thank you very much, Lisa. My screen is acting up. So for me, I'm going to say I neglected to mention the meeting place for the October 15th field trip. It's the old visitor center at Sandy Hook. Further information is on our website and on our Facebook page under events. I'm not sure what the moon cycle is then, but could be interesting to see where it is. And with that, thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to say good night. Lisa, I'll leave it up to you to end the program because I'm still showing myself in safe driving mode. Sorry about that.
Sounds good. Wishing you all clear skies and good birding. I'll see you all hopefully soon in the field.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.